Now that we've reflected some on our own intuitive orientation to negotiation, and hopefully we've managed to touch on and come into contact with that gut instinct and that very fundamental programming that we have that dictates how we approach a negotiation situation, we need to then ask ourselves, wait, so if that is what my basic programming is, and putting this together with what we've already discussed at length, that we negotiate so often, and so much of our lives are comprised of negotiation interactions, does that mean that all of my interactions across a wide spectrum of contexts and people and everything, am I doomed to keep acting them out the same way through this intuitive orientation, to keep acting out the same patterns again and again and again, whether it's good for me or not for the rest of my life? Am I just pre-programmed and that's it? Well, the good thing is that that's not how it is. Okay? Now, it's true, you do have an intuitive orientation. However, you also have a lot of other stuff going for you, and one of those is your very human ability to make choices. Our brain is very, very powerful, and part of it runs on autopilot, and it's very hard to turn that autopilot off. Don't confuse what I'm about to say with me saying you need to freeze your emotions and ignore them and just think from up here. Be the Terminator, that's what you got to be in negotiation. The reason I'm not saying that is simply because that's impossible. It's scientifically impossible. Instead, what I'm saying is that we do have this intuitive orientation, and yes, we do have that program running, but our brain is also capable of making intentional choices. And during negotiation, we have opportunities to make choices as to how we are going to think and how we are going to act. And those choices as to how we are going to think and how we are going to act can lead us down paths that our intuitive orientation, our natural style, would not lead us. That's the good news. So if we are able to combine our head and our gut, or our mind and our heart, depending on your preferred physical, mental kind of system of how things work, then we'll be able to create a more advanced, a more powerful, and a more capable you for your negotiation encounters. Now, in negotiation, we get to make a lot of choices. There are a lot of junctures at which we can look at the autopilot and decide to flick the switch off. And I'd like to focus on just a few of them, just to give you a picture of just how important these decision points are. And what we're going to focus on is our ability to make choice as opposed to just going with the flow. Okay? So the first big choice we get to make in negotiation is the question of whether to engage or to avoid. Okay? Now, for some people, that's a question that is entirely handled up here. Is this worth my while? Is this not worth my while? Do I have the energy? Do I not have the energy? Is there a potential for a good deal here? Is there not a potential for a good deal here? For others, this is a much more difficult choice moment, because if your auto-programming, if your natural orientation is avoidance, then your brain is going to be doing all it can in order to prevent you from engaging in deliberate choice about whether to engage or to avoid. It will want you to avoid. So some people will have more difficulty than others than in just raising this topic up for decision making. But once we've become familiar with our orientation, if we've learned that we are that type of person, then fine, we've learned that we need to be more conscious and more intentional about raising it to the surface and then asking ourselves some questions. Do we stand to benefit from this interaction? Would we be better off leaving the scene? Should we sit this out? Is this worth our while? Is this good for us? Okay? So these are the questions that we'll ask ourselves, and these will decide on a conscious level, on an intensious level, whether to walk into the shop or to move on to the next one, whether to sit down at the table with someone or to leave the room, whether to continue the conversation or to say no thanks and hang up the phone. Okay, so this choice between engaging and avoiding. The second choice that we can make is at a very, very top level of decision making, decide whether this seems to us to be a cooperative situation or a competitive situation. And in order to do this, we have to transcend any instinctive orientation we have of I'm a competitive guy, I'm a cooperative guy. You have to set that aside, and you have to say, well, at top level, this seems to be a competitive, let's say, a competitive context. For example, buying a used car, in which people are used to arm wrestling each other down. That's a competitive context. And then it involves asking yourself, well, is it necessarily that, or might there be other ways to do that? Or maybe I'm misreading the cues and this actually isn't a competitive, but it's more of a cooperative situation. So it's engaging very intentionally with decision making about reading of the situation on the competitive cooperative spectrum. And that's a second choice. And then we make a choice. We say, this seems to me to be cooperative. This seems to me to be to have the potential for competitive. The next choice we make is a choice at which we get a little more down in the weeds from that previous decision, and we decide, well, if that is the situation, then, given my goal, what would be the best strategy to achieve my goal? I can choose different types of game plans in order to achieve my goal. There's more than one road leading me to whatever it is I set out to get. And I need to make a conscious decision about what my game plan will be before walking in the room. So there's another decision choice. And finally, we make a million little decisions in the course of a negotiation, or we could make a million little decisions if we weren't operating from our guts. And those are decisions at the tactical level. By the difference between strategy and tactics, I intend the difference between a strategy being a game plan, an overall approach, a way of looking at this, and the tactical choice level means the actual things that I do. Okay, the moves that I make, the words that I say, the actions that I do, my body language vis-a-vis my counterpart, the warnings that I issue, the nods that I nod, and everything else that we do in a negotiation, in our interaction with the other party. I can choose each and every one of them, and I can certainly choose them to be in line with my strategy. So there's a connection between those two, and we'll get into that later. But these are all choices. And the more of these choices we can make intentionally, the more we will be able to transcend that basic operating system of our intuitive style.